Sam Gash, such a pleasure to have you here. I want to kick things off with a quote I heard you share in your TED Talk a couple years
Mhm.
ago. It was a Bob Dylan quote. He not busy being born is busy dying. I love that. Explain why that means something to you.
I love creation. I love creating, like tying pieces of the puzzle together and getting fully immersed and like that immersion, skin in the game, like build something from nothing. Like I love that, and that's for me that is living. And I think everyone would have a different interpretation of that quote. Like, what does it mean for you to truly be living? And in the absence of that, you're doing the opposite.
Because I get the truest sense of that in every area of your life. Like if I look at your family life, married, and a mum, and that is truly living in its greatest sense. And I think one of the greatest purposes in the world is to bring children into this world, but not only to bring them into this world, but to allow them to be the best, happiest, fullest versions of themselves. And I can speak to my beautiful experiences as a child with great parents, but also my hopes to bring kids into the world very soon. But then I also
Ah,
look at, yeah, very exciting, very exciting. Hopefully
are
this
you,
time next year,
oh my gosh, that's amazing.
which is,
Gosh,
it's a process for, we've spoken
yeah.
about it. You've got a connection with CF, someone in your
Mm.
family. And, for guys with CF, you have to do IVF. So there's this weird
I
thing
think,
where as a guy with CF, you don't develop a vas deferens. And so essentially, without going into the details, you're shooting blanks. Which is great when you and your
really?
partner aren't trying to have kids. But when you're
Yeah.
trying to have kids, it means that there's a little bit more of a process. And so for us, that process will sort of kick off with hormone treatment for
Okay.
Soph and going down that route sort of mid this year. We've got our first appointments coming up in a few months to discuss it. And so it's exciting.
Yeah, and like what a journey. Like I don't know if you've heard like my view of like adventure is a journey with an unknown outcome. And
Mm.
it's like the challenge of that is like when you have an outcome that you really want it to be a certain way, but I guess often the pathways to these goals can look like something that you didn't expect. And like I reckon the IVF process is something like that too.
For sure. Let's dive into that a little bit deeper because I love what you said there about that sense of adventure leading to unknown destinations. And I often think that we make the mistake as human beings who typically hate the idea of uncertainty, but should
Mm,
encourage ourselves to become a little bit more comfortable with that uncomfortable and unknown. For me, adventure, this sense of adventure, could be the thing that we have to strive for in life. I think often we talk about striving for happiness. I want to be happy. I want to have this. I want to
mm,
have that. We talk about these feelings, like these isolated feelings that are a part of the roller coaster of human emotions as the destination for what we want, as opposed to recognizing that the adventure of experiencing it all and going on a path, or I like to say a quest because it's so open ended, in which all of these
yeah,
things will be experienced and felt along the way. Um, but wholeheartedly, it's an adventure.
yeah.
What
I
does
mean,
that mean to
adventure.
you?
Well, adventure isn't just like these physical ones. And, I come from an endurance background, and I think often people would go like, oh, okay, she's talking about like, like going across India or climbing a big mountain. And yes, those are some of the adventures I've chosen to go on. But it was interesting you saying like the idea of chasing a feeling. Like, I think it is actually important to like connect feeling
Mm.
to be more important sometimes than like the tangible of like go to the top of a mountain or do this certain thing. It's like we do these things because we want to feel something. And what I kind of am more comfortable with, and I've got to tell you, like I used to be very rigid, A-type personality, liked, wanted to be like high performance and succeeding, but wanted to know exactly how it looked. So it's like didn't mean that I wasn't aspirational, still pushing boundaries, but I was really clear of the process and I was really clear of the end destination. And therefore, when I kept playing in that matrix, I could only go so far. And it wasn't as exciting. It also, like, on the flip side of it, like I now choose to kind of go in spaces where, like, I'm just going to feel deeply a lot of things. Like, they say, like, an ultra marathon is like life compressed because of the high number of psychological challenges that you can face in a really short period of time. And so I think I like feeling all of that. the highs, the lows, the insecurity, the self-doubt, the elation, like the celebration of small wins. Like I like it all. And I feel it more when I have a rough idea of where I want to go. I craft a blueprint to hopefully get there, but the reality is blueprints change once you start. I think that was always the case, but I think it is very much the case now. Post COVID world, like we live in such a rapid place where technology is changing all the time. Like social constructs are changing all the time. Everything's changing far more rapidly. We don't talk about 10-year visions anymore. We're likely to not even talk about 6-month plans. We're a lot more focused on to the now. And yeah, I have a high appetite now to be in discomfort. That said, I think there's some seasons of our life where there are certain components of our life that we don't want to feel discomfort in, and that is also totally fine. I think it is very well known that we grow beyond our known, grow in discomfort. But what is less talked about now is like the need for us to oscillate between comfort and discomfort. And like you personally knowing yourself well enough of knowing when, okay, I've got to pull back right now. I've got to go to something that I know. I've got to restore like my foundation of well-being. I've got to ground myself because you can't leap off shaky ground. And so
Mm.
for me, it's like really being intuitive to myself to go like, okay, push time, all in, draw back now. Yeah, it's like a dance. And the dance is about knowing yourself.
There's so much in that. And the first thing I want to go to, because I love everything you said there, and I highly resonate with what you're saying, this idea that running is such a metaphor for life. I spent some time on
Mm,
Sunday. I went out for a run and I decided to really cruise and throw the pack on and stay hydrated and just be out there and enjoy the sun. It was a little bit of a later start for me. And as I was running, I was thinking about how influential running as a sport, as a movement, as a daily practice,
mm,
or not always daily, but pretty consistently over the course of the week, how influential that's been for my growth as a person. And I was thinking that I think often in life, to use the metaphor, we run away from our adversity, but I've found that all of the reward and the growth has been through running through it and running towards it and taking it head on. And I love what you're saying here
mm.
about growing in your unknown. For you, what have the lessons and the key learnings about yourself been through the journey of diving into ultra running and becoming a runner?
Yeah, I mean, like, I think most people don't love it when it gets hard. Like, I think someone like yourself and myself too, like, we're reflective enough based on our past experiences to know that like okay, like those hard moments you reap rewards when you can find a way to push through. But like let's be realistic, it's still really hard when you're doing it, and it's great to be able to like pull yourself out to that like other perspective going no, it's like it's meant to be hard, I chose this, like it was unknown, like I don't know what it's meant to look like, and so therefore there's a challenge when we go from these things that we do know to what we don't know. Like there's this clunky phase in the middle where we are essentially finding our way. And so, what I know to be true from past experience is I'm my most proud of myself when I can find the tools and the resolve to like. It's not about like finding like it's not about growing necessarily. Like I'm proud of myself when I can just stay in it,
Mm.
despite how overwhelming it can feel, despite like the thoughts that creep into your head, like maybe I shouldn't be doing this, maybe this is beyond your capability. And I'm actually in that experience right now, physically. Like I do it in many other areas of my life, like starting a new business, like having done a podcast, like being a mother, like I live that in other areas. But if we stick in the context of running, I'm like what you call a diesel engine. Physiologically and genetically, I think my natural state is best to like, run consistent and run for long. And that has formulated the fact that like a lot of the expeditions I do are like that. So I've also really entrenched that kind of training system for me. Um, but I decided to sign up for an event called Race the Sun, and it's yeah, good. Our mutual friend Benny did it last year. It's where you're in a team of six, and between the six of you, you have to complete 345 kilometers, and the goal is to do it in 24 hours. You're beating the sun, which means you're averaging 4-minute 10K pace the entire way. And there's like they say it's like 7,000 meters of elevation gain throughout the thing, so it's like not even flat. A lot of it's on road, but there are sections on trail, and it's all strategy. Like you can change in and out of your team members when you want. So I pulled a team together. I am by far the slowest person in my team, which is humbling, but like you got to own where you are, like, and not apologize for it. I'm saying that to myself now to remind myself, like, don't apologize for it, but also like be comfortable saying it. Like, yeah, this is my reality. Like, I know you guys are faster. You can all do sub 410 consistently. I'm trying to get to 410 a couple of times and then to be able to string that together enough. And so I am trying to change what is my natural state right now. And, you know, I did a track session yesterday and I'm like, I don't know if that I can do that. Of course, I have that thought. I'm defying what my genetics are like. And it makes me think of all the athletes I have at her trials that are like, you know, I don't know if I can get faster. And I'm like, you can. And I'm now trying to apply that to myself. But the thing is, you get there when you show up. You get there when you craft a process that like tests you and challenges you. And then you balance it with all the recovery and all that kind of stuff. But it's like, you've got to be all in. And so that's like my exploration right now. Like, can I do this? And maybe I can't do it in the time frame. Like it's May 31st. Maybe I can't, but I'm going to get a hell of a lot closer with that kind of close time goal because it's forcing me to like show up now, not kind of put it off.
I love this because I think I would, and I think a lot of it's got to do with my CF, but I'd say that I'm probably very similar to you where if someone said to me, hey, Brad, track session tomorrow or 20K
Yeah.
at sexy pace, I'm like, I'm there for the 20.
20K sexy pace, baby.
You know
Any
what I
day of the
mean?
week.
It
Yeah.
feels so, like for me personally, to sit at that chill, cruisy pace, I'm a far better, quote unquote, athlete at that
Mm.
chill, relax, long run pace than I am when it gets to, like you said, 410s this morning. I was doing some 400-meter efforts and I was feeling the burn at 4 minute pace, 4 minute 10 pace.
Oh
I'm like,
yeah.
oh, I can feel
Yeah.
that
And
burn.
yeah, and here's the thing, like, you know, there's many examples in my past life because I'm someone who does a lot of different things. So like I can draw from past experiences. So like I didn't used to be technically a good runner, like rocks and like undulation and all that kind of stuff, like put my heart rate up and I lost confidence and therefore like I became more timid. But I'm now quite a good technical runner because I've consistently shown up to that thing. So I kind of like remember that I'm like, no, like you taught yourself to become technically stronger. You can teach yourself, you know, with the right people and like, you know, to get faster. And so like interesting you talk about a track session. Like I did a track session yesterday and today I did like a weightlifting session at my CrossFit gym. And so like mate, it's so humbling. Like I almost should show you a photo of it. Like I took it because I was like, we've all got to start somewhere to grow. And I took a photo of like, I had a bar with like the timber like weights because like that's what I need to be at right now. And I think everyone gets fixed because we have goals and we obviously craft these goals in a process to get there. We sometimes like keep going like, yeah, but I need to be there. Just own where you are without apology because that's what will make you go like, okay, I'm not what I was 2 years ago. And this is for a lot of people who are, you know, if anyone's listening to this and their mums, like it's so typical to kind of go like, oh, I used to pre having a baby, I used to be able to do X, Y, Z. And or they're like, I want to be this. And the reality is like, you're not what you were 2 years ago. You're not what you are hopefully going to be in a month's time. You are where you are now, but that can change.
I love this. And I want you to riff with me here on this idea that's just come to mind as we've been discussing this.
Yeah.
But I often think I show up and say to the world, hey, look at me, I'm disciplined because I get up early every day, I do a workout, but I have to call myself out because I've found that too often in my life, I've chosen the thing that is what some people would describe as incredible discipline. You're up early, you're after it, you're running. Like this time last year, or a little bit earlier in the year, I ran 10K every day for 48 days. And to some people who don't run, they go, so disciplined. But I shit it in because I was cruising every day at paces that I'm very comfortable in. And it was
Mm.
essentially, it was almost what I'll call fake discipline. But don't get me wrong, I could have been doing
Yeah. I
way
mean,
worse things.
yeah. And also, it is discipline, but it's like, what's the purpose? If
Is
the
it
purpose
performative?
was, yeah. So, were you trying to get better as a runner, or were you trying to kind of be like, I can do this same thing every single day and I want to feel the commitment that I can show up to this one thing? Like, what was the reason behind it?
So I guess for me, I'd never done a 70K week before. I'd come off the back of running a pretty sloppy 50K at the end of 2022. And I'd had a really good marathon showing in a PB in October 2022. And I was sitting there with a mate over a coffee, pretty busted up after my 50K, if I'm being honest. Had some issues with my foot, my tendon in my foot. And we're sitting there and we're actually like marveling at the achievement that Ned Brockman accomplished in 2022. And my mate said to me, do you realize if you put it into our layman's terms, that to
Mm.
do 10% of what he achieved over 48 days, you'd have to run 10K every day? And I was like, yeah. And he goes, so I've got a challenge for you. Can we both do 10K a day for 48 days and see if we can just do 10% of what Ned did? And I was like, oh, that's really interesting because I'd never run 7 days a week. I'd always sort of run 3 to 5. And I was like, yeah, I'm up for that. So we did it and we accomplished it. And we finished on a strong note, like a half marathon the last 2 days. And most weeks I ended up running between sort of 70 or 80 Ks. Like I'd step it up a little bit
Wow,
more.
a lot.
And for me, I was like, I achieved something. But then when I come out of that challenge, I kind of had a really average rest of the year. And I think I found myself
Mm.
more often than not doing the things that I was comfortable doing just to cruise by and stay at that level, which, like you said, there's nothing wrong with enduring and being consistent. But I know for me that all of the reward and sense of fulfillment I get is when I step into what you say, that unknown.
But
And
I
so
mean,
for,
so you're a little. I think you're a little hard on yourself. But that's if that's kind of your wiring that gets you to push the boundaries, then like that's great. The reality is you hadn't ever done that before. So like you were in the unknown.
mm,
You were doing it in a process that was palatable for you. But like the objective on its merits is something that you hadn't done. So you've now showed to yourself you can do a 70K week. If we break it down to like performance objectives, you're not going to necessarily get better as a runner by doing 10Ks every single day.
mm,
Your body needs time. Like where we get better as athletes is when we have varied training levels in our running. And
mm,
we incorporate different types of modalities such as strength, mobility, yoga, cross training. That's where we get better. We have hard efforts, like our strength sessions, our intervals, our hills, where we push at like that, 80%, 90%, whatever it might be. And then, we probably also have another hard session on that day, even with a strength. And then we have an easy day where we can absorb that load to be able to like go again, like whatever that structure might be. So like as a coach, like that's what we train our athletes to do. A lot of people go out and just run at 60%. They go out every single time and it's like they're at 60. And that's all they're really ever going to be able to do because they're not forcing their system to perform differently. And so like, but the merits of what you take from that experience you did is like, I can do 70K. That is a huge training load. Like back in the day with ultra running, like the guys like Anton Kuprika and like Joe Grant, like they were running like 200-mile weeks, which is, Timmy
mm,
Olsen, crazy distances. And like I know a lot of people in like the big ultra world might still be doing that, but there's less conversation of that now, and it's more about like quality and getting in cross training and holistically supporting your body to not just do it for the next long run, but to do it for the long runs of your life.
mm.
Yes, the specific long run of running, but also like the other things in life as well. Um, so yeah, I think for you, like, I mean, obviously you're always doing different stuff, but it's like, okay, how can I like sometimes less is more. Like I don't have the time, to be honest. If you looked at my Strava, I often have people say to me, "God, your training load is actually quite low." And I'm like, "Yeah, because I have so much other stuff in my life." And yes, I love my trail running, and I love I'm obsessed with it in a sense, but I also have other stresses in my life and other joys in my life, and they have to complement each other. So if you're in a period of your life where work is really hard, relationship is challenging, you can't make the commitment to fuel up properly and recover properly, then your physical training load has to be lower so you don't break. And
Mm.
that's like this honest reflection that we have to always ask ourselves, like, what can we give right now? And for someone like you, like I reckon that it's quite high, but sometimes you have to say to yourself, like, what is the right level to give? Because I've got, like I know what it's like to have a podcast, like to deliver, you editing yourself.
Yeah, I do it all.
Yeah, it's a lot, right? Do you find it a lot?
It's a lot, and I don't particularly enjoy editing. I really enjoy the conversation. I don't love the edit.
I mean, AI could probably help with that now, but like I did everything. When during COVID, I had the podcast, I did an episode a week and I did long form podcasts just like you. And I loved the conversation. And then I did like editing to kind of make sure that like these are long conversations and like I just wanted to finesse it a little bit. But I'm an obsessive person. And I'm a shit editor. So it took me even longer. Um, but I couldn't believe how much work went into it. And it's like, like these things take time and like we're never just one thing. Like we're not just a
Mm.
runner. Like, you're an entrepreneur, you're a speaker, like you're an advocate for CF. Like there's, the podcast host, like you'll have many feathers to your bow. And it's like, how do you balance it all at different
Mm.
stages and let one reign at one time and then drop it back at another time?
One thing I want to do here, but without turning this into a running coaching
Yeah.
consultation, but one thing I want to do is I want to call out some of my toxic traits as an athlete. And I'm sure that they're going to resonate with a lot of people, but particularly as a runner. So here's a few of the things that I want you to comment on. So the
Hit me.
first thing is, anytime that you're going to run a distance, you need to fuel. I'm a horrible fueler because I often sit in the space of I love my food, Sam. And so I often sit in the space of probably need to drop 2 or 3 just to be a little bit lighter on my feet for that big long run coming up. So I'm not going to, I run fasted because I don't love eating early, which obviously usually means that I would go on like up to a 25, 30K run without any fuel at all.
Mm.
And I'll get to the end of it absolutely depleted, but fuck, I'm going to smash some almond croissants and food later that day. So it's almost like deplete to reprieve with all the good stuff.
Yeah.
But I find that because of that, I never perform that optimally during the run. And I'm often like for the rest of the day trying to rehydrate, trying to get myself back into, yeah. But for anyone here who's just watching on the audio, you can see I'd call absolute bulk buy of gels there and fuel. I'm not good with it.
Yeah, I have them. You have to train yourself to get good at
Mm.
it. It's like the most easily absorbed. So we're talking about, for those who are into running, um, fueling yourself for your runs is really important. And I say this, but also kind of say to you, like, I don't always get this right. Sometimes I'm rushing from one thing to the next. And I'm so proud of myself for getting to my session, but I haven't done the fueling. But we are talking right now in the context of performance, high performance. And the reality is, and I know a lot more about it in the women's space. So I don't want to kind of protest to be like an expert for like men's health and men's high performance. That for women, fasting is not great. At all. Our bodies don't respond well to it. We deplete. Women are actually chronically underfueled and therefore we underperform. And so making sure that you have something before your run is really important. And really with the long runs, like, but if you fuel, do the test. Actually, let's do the test. You did a long run recently, right?
Yeah, Sunday.
Okay. Are you running again this Sunday?
Yep.
Okay. Have some kind of energy source every 45 minutes, whether that be a gel or a chew. If you feel like you can't get those two in, you should be able to get chews, mate. Like, look at these are Cliff Blocks. Like they're like little like lollies essentially.
Oh, yeah.
Like they're easy to get down. They've got electrolytes in them. They've got the calories. Have something every 45 minutes. And if you really can't do that, get liquid nutrition like a Tailwind or something, and you can just sip it in. At least you're getting 150 plus calories an hour. I'd be really interested to know how you feel during the run and post the run, and then your next run from the two. I mean, I used to be an extremist. I'm actually now a moderate, but that's so funny I say that because like, I think I've gone so far at extreme. Moderate to me maybe still seem extreme to other people, but my version of life is I'm in a moderate phase of life. And when I was younger, before I really ran, I did my very first 100K race, which was the Oxfam Trail Walker. And I used to party a lot back then. And I remember saying to my friends, however long it takes me to do this 100K race, I'm going to go to Revolver the next weekend for that amount of time. I'm like almost embarrassed to say it, but hey, we've all lived life, right? And I had these two very extreme experiences. And I should say I think it was like 15 plus or whatever hours. I had those two experiences back to back. And overnight, I was like, I know what made me feel better. And it's like, it changed my entire life by having these varied experiences. It's like once you start to fuel and feel your performance and feel your mental state being better and your recovery better, and then you can show up to the other things in your life better because you don't feel tired and fatigued. you then go like, I'm the idiot for not doing it right.
It's such a good point, right? Because one of the things that I found, so without making this podcast about me, I'm just going to take 30 seconds here to give you some
Uh,
context. At the moment, I feel not as busy as a couple people, but relatively busy. I sell houses 5 days a week. I record 1 to 2 pods a week, and then I'm speaking and doing stuff whenever I get the opportunity. So I very rarely have a day where there isn't an element of work to be done or a little bit of work to get done. And so my partner, Soph, we run together a couple of days a week. And she said to me, "Do you want to do a long run on Thursday?" And I was like, "Oh, I've got 2 pods that day. And I know that if I, typically for me, up to 15 is fine. But if I go 20 plus, I just find my cognitive function isn't great that day. And so I know that I have to get better at fueling. I heard, I don't know if you've heard of the Heaton brothers, founders of Represent 24/7, some great guys, clothing and activewear, British dudes over in the US at the moment. And George is a pretty insane athlete as far as running and high rocks and all that goes. And I heard him saying in a clip that for him, the moment he got fuel right, he found that he could still train, but also
yeah,
be peak in his business on the same day. And I haven't been able to marry the two yet. And so that's how
yeah,
I know I've got to be so much better at it.
yeah. I mean, like, you know what it's like to be fatigued and depleted.
Mm,
Like you've lived so that feeling for so much of your life. Don't when it's in your control, and you've had to do that, and it was not in your control.
mm,
It is now in your control to get this element right.
100%.
Um, and
I
it's like
like
I
it.
know, like yeah, when I do like trail running, like when I start to get sloppy on the trails, like it's because I haven't eaten enough and like I can't neurally make decisions. Like I can't lift my legs up. Like so like your energy source, like if you want to expend energy, you've got to bring energy in as well.
Mm,
It's like it's simple maths. And the challenge with like ultras is you're always in a deficit because you can never consume enough calories per your energy output. And therefore you have to start early on because you don't want the deficit to be too big.
yeah.
You're trying to prevent that gap. And so you do start within the first, like you're doing an ultra and like you start within the first, 30 minutes getting some kind of calories down, whatever is your formula that works for you. And everyone is unique, but there are some like principles that should generally work for people. And so like you've got to like, cause you're, you know, yeah, you can never consume enough because your gut won't tolerate high calories, which is why you have to
Mm,
go for simple sources of fueling like gels. I'm working with a lot of athletes at the moment on like everyone's like I hate gels, and I'm like I get it, but like sometimes we have to do what we don't like if it's what's the best thing for us. And you can get yourself used to them. Like there's a lot of different gels these days. Like look for clean ones. I mean, Morton, Coda, they're really great. And I also just like for you, like I don't have all of it at once. Like I can't get that all down. So I might
mm,
actually hold a gel for 40 minutes and I will
mm.
just like slowly get it down. And that's a way you can kind of start to train your body to get it in.
I like that. I'm going to ask you 2 more running questions before we
Yep.
move on. The second is, how much of my running should I be doing in zone 2?
Oh, they say quite a lot. I can't give you a percentage. It depends again, what is your goal? Um, what are the other elements? Like, so basically zone two, it's what I kind of call like a base mile run. And I probably do between 1 to 2 base mile runs maybe during the week. And my long run is typically at a zone two. So
Yeah.
maybe like between 2 to 3.
Because I find that I often don't run by tracking my heart rate, which is obviously the key for zone 2. And I think for me, zone
Oh,
2,
you can work it out. The talk test.
but you know what? Here's the issue, Sam. I was
You can
born to
talk.
talk underwater. So
Yeah. You're not
my
pushing
issue
hard
is
enough.
I
No,
can,
no, no. You're not pushing hard enough. You can't. You're
yeah,
not pushing hard enough.
maybe I need
Yeah.
to really test that because I feel like for me, I probably spend most of my time in zone 3. Is that a dead
Yeah.
zone?
I'm not I don't believe in like rigidly fitting into zones because obviously like our zones are often worked out by our heart rate, but our heart rate is influenced by a lot of other stuff as well. So um, I don't have the answer to that, but what I would say is like you can feel when you're in zone two.
Mm,
Um, and you should be very clearly be able to understand when you're in zone five. You can't talk. You can't even get a word out really. Like maybe one word can come out. but your heart
Yeah.
rate is so high, like you're at, you're kind of getting very close to, that threshold capacity.
Mm.
And so if you can talk, maybe you've got more in the tank.
Maybe I'm just too soft. I think
Nah,
you've outed me
you're
there. You've
not
outed me
soft.
there.
You're not, but like it's like a lot of us. Well, could you have talked when you were doing your 4 minute pace the other day for the 400?
This morning I was shouting some encouragement from Soph, which she hates when she's in the hurt locker.
Yeah, yeah,
But I like to be supportive PT
yeah,
boyfriend. But I was probably this morning I wasn't uncomfortable. I could probably have sat there for a fair while longer,
yeah,
but I was probably sitting around zone 4 this morning.
yeah. Okay, so it's just playing and like just seeing what it's like. It's like how we don't want to be in like that discomfort for too long. Like our bodies aren't designed to be in it for too long. It's like you just need to be able to tap into it for a bit to then kind of like push your threshold up. But this is like the fun part. Like this is the play. Like don't if I mean you obviously like the science of it and that's great. I'm like more creative in the sense of like I don't like hardened rules. I'm a massive rule breaker, so therefore like like I love to blur the line. And so for me it's kind of like being creative and playful and kind of go like I'm going to tap into this, feel this mode right now. I don't need to be rigid onto my watch. I like to get really intuitive with my running, and the reality is pace is not great because every single day like what we can get influenced by different things in our life that will impact our pace. So I try and go to like perceived effort.
I like that. And I must admit that really rings a bell is something that sits in the back of my head constantly. A great takeaway from, I think maybe episode 34 or 36 of the podcast with Taylor
Emma.
Cecil. Good
Mm-hmm.
memory. Taylor
Mm.
Cecil, Mick Fenning's movement coach, and
Yeah.
Ali Day's movement coach is a weapon. And his philosophy for training was that he likes to play 50% art, 50% science and find the
Yeah, I
balance
love that.
between the two. And I
Yeah.
really like that. That
Yeah,
resonates
it's
with
true. And
me.
like I when I'm in the mode, I'm intuitive and play, and then I review the data afterwards to
Oh,
kind of
I
like
like
try and
that.
make sense of what it is. So like I'm trying to be in it. Like I might look down at a little bit at my watch to kind of gauge. But the reality is I try and feel it, and then I kind of go like, okay, well, let's look what that was today.
I love that. That's really well put. To move, before we move on from running, I should say, as a trail runner, as an advocate for trails, I want you to sell me on trail running because for me, I spend 99.9% of my time running along concrete paths near beaches and it's beautiful. I love it, right? I love a run. But we do have some incredible trails here in the Illawarra and I often feel
Yeah,
as
you
though I should
do.
be out there more. So I'd love your sell, your take. If you had a moment to pitch me and convert me, what would it be?
It's the adults' playground. Um, it's constantly changing. There are merits of both. Like I'm not like anti-road, although like I live in the Dandenong Ranges, like I have to drive to get to road and I have to drive to get to flat. But I love that it's this constant movable feast where like your pace isn't static. And so therefore you don't become rigid on it. Like you're constantly changing gears because it's like, okay, you're about to go up a hill, like it might be a 10% gradient. Like as you're approaching it, you've got to drop it back a little bit to kind of like, you can't go that same pace. And so I love this like constant change. Like I think I keep referring to this notion of a dance. Like I love not being in the same state. And it's also incredibly restorative. There's so much science behind like the immediacy of, like reduction in anxiety and overwhelm. It is the most perfect circuit breaker that you can get. Yes, nature does that. Another reason is because you have to be present a lot more. Like sometimes when you're on the road, you can switch off, right? Like you know what's coming up next, you know what your pace is going to be. Yeah, you can push and go faster, but like generally there's so much more known quantities. Trail running for me is like almost like life. It mirrors it so much better. And therefore, like I feel like when I go on a trail run, I become like the better version of myself for my life off the trails as well. And like the way I would sell it to you is like come to the Dandenong Ranges and come on a trail run and you'll get it straight away.
You know what? I'll take you up on that one day.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll
And
take you
the
up.
cool thing to note is like trails is a pretty wide definition. Like, yeah, you can have single trail and you can have mountains and Himalayas and all that cool stuff, but like you can also have like urban trail. And my thing is like just try to get near grass and green and for a lot of people, like we coach people on trail running programs and they're like, oh, do I have to be on a trail all the time? And I'm like, Of course not. Like, do what's most convenient. I'm encouraging you where possible to get to trail, but also to explore what trail you have near your area.
Yeah, I
And you
love
have more,
that.
like even going on ovals, can help.
I think what you said there and I think most people would identify themselves as busy-minded individuals in this day and age where, we're often casting our attention towards our phones or the digital world or the craziness happening around us. I think it's a beautiful way to break up the monotony of that
Mm.
and get in touch with yourself and be present, as you said. I really love that. I really want to dive into this idea of performance, not just physically, but for you as a speaker, as a storyteller. And I have
Mm.
so much to learn from you. And one of the reasons I was so excited to chat today is as an inspiring speaker who's very much at the entry level of this industry and looks up to people like yourself. I remember hearing you share a story, and I can't remember where, it might have been through socials, where you spoke about one of the agencies, one of the gentlemen from those agencies, I think it was Keith from Inspire, come out to
Oh.
see you speak, and he rated you a 5 out of 10.
Yeah.
Talk to me about that story, that experience.
Yeah. Okay, so I started speaking almost as a conduit to. Um, I'd started doing endurance sports, and then I was supported by, I think, no. Initially, it started that I started speaking for this organisation called the League of Extraordinary Women, and I'd started running. They're like, we'd love to hear your story and tell it. And I loved the process of not just thinking about my story, but kind of going like, what are the parallels of this experience that can be relatable and connective to people, irrespective of that they might have never run a day in their life. I don't typically like, it's so funny, I've never normally started a podcast actually talking so much about like run and performance, but and I love that. That was so much fun. But when you said let's talk more about the mind, for me it is all mind.
Mm.
Um, I don't come from a physical background. I was like almost physically dormant for the first 20 plus years of my life. And so for me, like I've had to unlock invisible rules and that I had crafted and ingrained about like who I was and what I could do. And the reality is like running and the work that I do in like social impact and it's really a conduit to mindset, high performance, living a life of like purpose and passion, trying to you know care and contribute to the people and the communities around you. Like how do we also like develop our sense of belonging? So I kind of fell into speaking, but then, I come from a background, I did a double degree in performing arts and law. So I do enjoy the art of storytelling and I do love the art of like analysis and like construction of ideas. So I did those couple of talks for the League of Extraordinary Women. And then I met this guy in finance, Tim Steele, who's still a great friend to this day. And when I ran across South Africa, I'd actually like I quit my job in law, I quit my job in finance. It was the first time in my life where I had no job. And it was terrifying. It was also terrifying because I had no idea if I could even do this run, which was 32 days across like the Freedom Trail in South Africa. So I was like, I felt like I was double whamming. Like, I don't know if I can do this. And I had no idea what I'm going back to. I've literally left a career path that I spent 10 years at university preparing myself for. And about 5 days into my run across South Africa, I get a message from Tim, and he's like, I want to book you for a road show. And he booked me for this 5-city road show. And I was like, oh, wow, like maybe this could be a part of what I do. Like, I'm definitely, it's an element of my work. It's not all that I do. And I like that because, like, I want to constantly evolve. Like, I don't just want to talk about the same story. I think a speaker that endures a career in speaking is probably not a full-time speaker. Probably someone who is like living in leadership and living in teams and living in construction because things change, like you change. And so like my talks over the years have like fundamentally changed. But I remember like I got in connection with this guy called Keith. He runs a company called Inspire Speakers and he had just started. And he was like, I really like to hear you speak. And he came and saw me speak. And I was actually really nervous because I'm like, it's like an audition. This guy is watching me and he may potentially be able to help me get work. And I remember like I hadn't even left the building before he gave me feedback, and he's like, "Yeah, you're like a 5 out of 10." We laugh about it today, like we're really great mates. And I feel like I developed my career as a speaker simultaneously to him developing his business in Inspire Speakers. When we would try and get me gigs for speaking, we tried to make it like more affordable for clients. So we would not charge accommodation, and I would stay at like Keith's house and sleep on the couch. And like we would like work together on like it was like a team. Like it was really cool. Like we used to kind of like pretend that we were in like Jerry Maguire, and like we would like reenact scenes and like and yeah, like it's amazing. Like, but it's good to kind of know relatively to everyone else where you're at. And like, I'm happy I didn't start at a 10 out of 10 because like you want to grow, like you want to be better. Like who starts something having never really done it and is the best at it? Like that's just not how it works.
I
Which
heard
is
Jimmy
why there are
Carr.
different.
Sorry,
Pardon?
I heard Jimmy Carr, the comedian, speak about this on Modern Wisdom, the podcast last year. He said that he often thinks, for example, the podcaster who's at number 150 in the charts is much happier than the podcaster who's at number one. I'm sorry, Joe Rogan, because maybe this is my justification. Maybe why this is why it sat well with me, because I'm definitely
Yeah,
number
I
one.
love this.
But there is so much room to grow. And so
Yeah.
you can look and you can see so much ahead of you. And you know that throughout the process, not only will you enjoy the ride, but you're going to learn so much and develop. Where the person who's at the
Mm.
top, they're at the pinnacle. It's called peak for a reason. There's
Yeah. And like
technically,
mm, that's so true. Like the rate of growth is a lot quicker when you're at the bottom. And so you're learning a lot and you're experimenting and like that, I think I said before, like speakers are on different fees based on like experience, credibility, like what their particular topic might be, their particular skill set and talent, like all that kind of stuff. And like there's a range for that for a reason. And like, when you start something, like if people want to be speakers, like speak for free, like work out not just like what you want to speak at, but what you're good at speaking about and what resonates with people. And you only learn that through trial and error. Um, and so like I did a lot of talks, and even like when I'm wanting to test new material, like I, might take a lower fee to do that because I'm kind of playing around with it. But like I love the craft of it. Speaking is a craft, and like it should evolve all the time. And it's a very lucky career path to kind of be in. But like it's almost like I'm a student of a speaker as well as being a speaker.
can I ask you a question there? That, I guess, that
Mm.
philosophy that speaking is a craft, is that the same philosophy that you shared at the time of getting that really critical feedback? Or has that become a mindset to help you develop and grow?
I mean, I didn't like receiving it. I want to be the best. But also like it put an absolute fire under my belly and it stopped me being complacent, and I worked really hard. And I also developed a lot of trust that someone could just say that to me. Like no one loves to hear that they're not good. No one loves like he was giving constructive feedback, but like I think it's a natural human reaction to be defensive when someone kind of pulls apart the things that you haven't done right. But like it's the reflection process of going like, oh my gosh, this person like cared enough about me to like give me some home truths to help me get better. And now it's on me. Where do I want to be? Do I want to stay at a 5 or do I want to get better?
I love that. And I think that dedication to the pursuit of self betterment is something that we can all learn from. And I don't think that's a bad goal for anyone to have. To
No,
constantly
we are
to
on
be able
this
to look at
planet
yourself.
literally to do that. We're on this planet to evolve. Like it's what I like to describe as this notion of extension. Like when you choose to kind of pull the boundaries of like how you know yourself and what your capabilities are, like in that space you are deeply learning who you are. Um, and like I think that's like an amazing like thing of like being on this planet.
Very much my opinion here, and I can imagine this would be different for everyone, but I know the way that I'm wired as a human being in the privilege, I guess in the times that I've been privileged enough to sit and hear speakers share their stories, to share their testimony, and to, impart their valuable insights onto me. I feel that I connect most with the speaker who is firstly vulnerable enough to understand the audience, to understand maybe what
Mm.
they'd like to feel, but has been in touch enough with their own feeling and emotion to know why that message is important and powerful. I love the people who are storytellers in the truest sense of the word, who know how to connect with you on that story and just to drip those little messages and insights along the way. But most importantly, I love someone who is, who has a level of conviction for what they're sharing with you. You can tell that it isn't just a performance, but it's something that they feel and truly believe in. And that conviction is what sells the message. And so I wonder for you, like over the course of this incredible career you've built in speaking, what have been those key things that you've worked on that have allowed you to connect with audiences and have impact? Because to be at the level you are and be speaking as consistently as you are, you're having an impact on audiences. That's undeniable.
I mean, it's a great question. There's many layers to it. The first thing is like know that you can. Like, I get nervous before every talk because I really want to deliver something that can hopefully be supportive. I mean, I think gone are the days are like, and I'm not even into this inspiring kind of concept, but like gone are the days of just telling an inspiring story. If you can't tangibly help people in the audience potentially embed or experiment or reflect on components of their life for their betterment, then it's just a story that's not going to hold very long. Um, and so, like for me, it's like understanding like that balance of like a bit of humor, a bit of self-deprecation, like, and it's different for everybody. So, like, my thing for people is like you have to be true to you because you're right. Like, authenticity is incredibly important. Like, you can catch people out for like they're trying to be someone else. Like, when like someone's done really well at something, that all of a sudden you see different versions of like other people trying to do the exact same thing, but also in the exact same way. And it's like you could try to do the thing that that person did, but maybe put your own natural flavor to it. And then that would make a lot more sense. Like you can kind of feel when there's a disconnect between like the process and the execution of it. And so like so for me, like, I like a comedic speaker or I like a business speaker or, a thought leader in a different space. But like as long as they are integrous to who they are, then it works. And so like I think like how do you be integrous to yourself? You need to know yourself. Um, you need to know the things that have challenged you, and you also need to be comfortable talking about that challenge. And then share the reflections of like how you've worked on that. So like that's my style of speaking. Like I like to be very in the moment. I'm not a scripted speaker. I'm with my audience and I definitely draw energy from them, which is a good and a bad thing because sometimes people don't give obvious energy, and it's not because they're not into it and it's not because they don't like it. It's just because they're more reserved, or maybe the culture of the organization is different and they don't express, or they might not ask questions. So you can't also judge if your talk is landing based on often the reactions from other people. I've learned that sometimes the hard way. I'm like, oh my gosh, that bombed because they didn't laugh there or they didn't ask a question afterwards. And then I go back to my computer and there's like multiple, messages on LinkedIn. And sometimes they've been the most profound ones, but like people are processing information and it's like the after work. I don't know if I'm answering this question, but I think the reality is like we talked about before, like what you speak about should reflect where you are in this moment as well, but maybe what it took you to get there. So I still sometimes talk about components of my experiences 10 years ago, but I do talk about it in the lens of how I understand that now as well.
I love that. It makes it relevant to the moment. And it's interesting what you say there about not judging your performance by the immediate emotion of the crowd. I had an experience probably a month ago now. I went and spoke to, it was around 1,700 secondary school students up at the ICC in
Oh,
Darling
tough
Harbour.
audience. Tough.
It's funny. Students are really interesting because I've had really great experiences with them, but they are, as you say, the hardest to read in the moment because they quite often at their age get a little bit distracted and antsy, and they've been made to sit there all day and listen to speakers, or they're in between classes, so they're not exactly present. But I love the experience of speaking to them because at their age it can have such an effect on their life. And I got off the stage a couple of weeks back now, a month ago, and Soph was with me. She had the day off, and I said to her, probably a 6 out of 10. What do you reckon, darling? She goes, yeah, it's not your best. She goes, it was good, but definitely wasn't your best. And because I ask her for really honest feedback, because one of the things I struggle with is I find people rarely give honest feedback because they're scared they're going to hurt your feelings. And
Totally.
don't get me wrong, I
Yeah.
feel it. If someone says I'm not great, like you, I'm very competitive. I want to be great at what I do. And so I feel it, and it's very visceral, that feedback. But I
Mm.
want to be better because I'm dedicated to being better, because it's something I want to have a long career in and get to do. And
Mm.
so I was so surprised by the amount of messages. And even my mum got emailed by one of the kids' mums to congratulate her for being a great parent. So it's funny
I
how
still love
you
that.
can't pick it in the
Yeah.
moment, right? But often it's just interesting I think sometimes you just got to be present in your own performance and to take all of that with a grain of salt. But, just try to always
Yeah.
be better.
And also, like, not every audience member is going to resonate with you. And, like, that's also okay. Like, you're standing for something, a way of thinking, a way of being, like, and like, that doesn't have to be the same for everybody. So, like, I think that's all right. Like, you don't need to make yourself palatable for the universe. I'd rather like make a couple of people feel uncomfortable because the way I choose to approach life and what I've learned from it is not where they're at, and
Mm.
that's fine. Like, I think it's like a people pleasing, maybe ego driven mentality to try and win everybody over. It's not about that. It's also not about you as a speaker. Like, yeah, like, you got to keep your ego in check. You're standing on a stage, and yeah, often that stage is elevated, and people are hearing your story. And you get off stage, and often they ask a question more about you. And what I've learned over the years is, like, I used to feel very uncomfortable about it. I was like, why am I uncomfortable, like, having chats with people afterwards? And what I realized is that all of a sudden I'd given an hour of myself, and then all of a sudden they want to ask another question, which is so fine, but there's an imbalance of, like, the relationship. So you're not even speaking as, like, equals in a way. And so, like, I now really try that when someone asks me a question, I try and turn it into, like, tell me something about you, like, let's talk about you. And then I found the conversation became so much more organic and two-way, and not just like one person asking a question and you kind of rabbiting on. Like, how do we make it a dialogue? And it became
Mm.
much more rewarding and comfortable to do. So don't believe your own shit too much as well. Like, you've had an experience. Everyone's had a human experiences. You're kind of lucky to get up on stage and share your story. Hopefully it makes an impact, but it's also like that shouldn't 100% drive you as well. Like, you do the best you can do with what you've got at this time, and everyone's shit stinks.
I love that. And that's one of the things I love the most about the podcast. Like, the podcast for me is the thing that I do professionally that I enjoy the most, because it doesn't have to be about me, which is
Mm.
sometimes, your ego gets challenged because you want to chime in and connect on something that you've done that's similar. But at the same rate, it's very refreshing and it's very settling to know that you don't have to be the superstar today, buddy, because you got Sam Gash on the show. So relax and learn
I love
something
doing that
and enjoy.
yeah, I love doing that as a podcast host. It was but it does take time because you often think like, oh, I have to provide an insight. And
Mm.
it's like, no, like, you've brought this person on because their insights are different to yours, and like often your audience already knows your insights. And
Mm.
so, like, you're providing them with a different lens of thinking, and often they'll be complementary. And so that's when, or they might be different. So that's when good conversation and discourse can happen. And that's, great for people to hear different perspectives. But yeah, like, I liked that as a podcast host. I was like, oh, I get to actually, like, I get to learn, and I also get to kind of like be an active listener.
Talk to me about one of the things that you share in your keynotes, this idea of strategic vulnerability. Now, we've all heard about vulnerability because it's a bit of a buzzword at the moment. And I think we're learning as a society that the more comfortable we can be in vulnerability, the greater connections we have with the people we love, the people that we care about. But this idea of strategic vulnerability you shared in almost a different way to what I've heard it before. So I'd love to hear your
Yeah,
take on it.
I know it's a bit of an oxymoron, right? Because, like,
Mm.
vulnerability, like, you almost, it's kind of given this flavor of like, yeah, you share about yourself and you like facilitate trust because you're like personally connecting with other people. And like, sure, that is totally true, and it can organically happen. But often it doesn't, because the work environment doesn't allow you to feel safe to be vulnerable. I worked in law. When I did it, I did not feel safe to kind of necessarily be the full version of myself. And I reckon I masked. And people with neurodivergence are masking all the time, and it's kind of killing them on the inside because they feel like if they were their true selves, it wouldn't be palatable. And women also experience that, like, if I don't show up in a certain type of way, like, is that going to affect my opportunities for promotions and pay rises and to also just being accepted? So strategic vulnerability is like this notion of understanding that obviously what allows teams to go to the edge of the world, to do daring things, to be innovative, to push boundaries. And that's happening a lot in organizations because we're operating in a space that we've never known before. And so teams are doing really unique, innovative things. But one of the things that allows people to do that when there's a high degree of uncertainty and unknown, and there is a fragility of human emotion in that space, is for people to trust each other. An element of people trusting each other is to know a bit about who the people they are standing alongside with. So as a leader, you have to find ways of like connecting yourself with your team. And it might not be natural for you to do so. And so like it's strategic because you're intentionally doing it. And that doesn't take away from the benefit of it as long as you're not doing it in a manipulative sense. It's like, hey, like right now, every person in my team needs a different thing in order to move forward. And so like knowing your team allows you to know how to place maybe that degree of vulnerability to support the person.
Yeah, I love that. And I think for anyone listening, this idea, this concept of a leader, we often think of it's just the captain of the team or the
No,
CEO of the company or the manager. We're all leaders in
team.
some element of our life, right?
Well, yeah, we all have different skill sets. The best teams are like the ones that work really with beautiful synergy, where all of our skill sets complement each other and allows us to go a lot further. Like, there is a lot of organizations that work heavily in like consensus, and it's like personal experience and reflection. I think consensus can be something that really halts progress. And why should everyone have this consensus or have like an opinion on something that's not their skill set? Sure, like maybe you can ask questions and challenge, but like sometimes just give authority and like gravitas to the person who's like worked in a particular space and they have experience and try that idea versus like having to wrestle with it time and time and time again. Like, like we have to move forward. There is like this idea of like sometimes velocity over process. And, organizations sometimes need to be really process driven, but in like times of unknown, like velocity is sometimes more powerful to be innovative, to be at the top of your game, to get something, a product, a service forward first. And even in social impact, like timing matters and counts. And then you iterate on the fly. And the way that you iterate on the fly is so when something doesn't work out versus seeing it as a failure, you kind of go like, no, 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 that failure was going to happen because we're moving in velocity, which is very fast paced. We weren't able to test these things. And so some things are going to work right now and some things won't. But because we have trust through the degree of vulnerability and connection with each other, we can move past that failure and just go like, okay, let's park that to the side and let's reiterate again. So it's like, how do you keep getting people to move forward when things aren't always going to plan? And like, that's life, right? They're not always going to go to plan. Everything is, I think things are far more speculative like than they used to be. Like a lot of charities work speculatively and people are like, I want to know exactly where my dollar went. And I'm like, they don't have a crystal ball. Like they're trying an initiative in a really complex environment. Hopefully it works. And hopefully there's a lot of proof in the pudding and like expertise and research. But some things that people have raised funds for are going to be put to ideas that don't work. There's a lot of organizations that have like donated items, like raised funds and donated toilets. I remember when I ran through India, I was in a province in Bihar, a really underprivileged, gender inequalities at an all-time high, poor resources and access to schools, and a group of people, or I don't know if it was a charity, decided to donate toilets because one of the reasons that girls might not go to school is because they can't, during menstruation, they won't go to if there's no toilet at the school, they won't go. And so people donated toilets, but like there was no infrastructure to use those toilets and to particularly fix them when the toilets weren't working. And so there was this room where there was like 50 toilets. It was like where toilets go to die. And I was like, okay, so these people had this good idea. They raised funds for it. They thought they were solving a problem, but actually like it didn't work. And now there's just like litter and like a waste of toilets and girls are still not going to school during menstruation. but it was an idea and it was implemented and it wasn't done, you know. So I think these things, I think I've kind of gone off point, but like, actually, I don't even know what the question
No,
was.
but
Did that make sense?
so I'm going to tie this all in here. So I love what you're saying, because we started with strategic vulnerability. We then
Oh,
went
yeah.
into leadership. We got to a point in which we started talking about velocity and process, how they align, how sometimes we need one of more than the other. But it makes so much sense. And the thing that comes immediately to my mind when we talk about this topic, or these range of topics, is government and policy and testing
Mm,
times. And we've been through some testing times in the
yeah.
last couple of years. And I don't want to get too political with the podcast by any means, but we're often quite critical because it is high stakes. I get it, but we're often quite critical of our governments who, on the fly, you know, be it bushfires, floods,
Mm.
COVID, whatever it may be, aren't always going to get it right. You know, it's
Absolutely. Like, and I'm not going to get political either, but like you can think about these like big leaders, you know, in any organization, or the person who's the spokesperson. Um, of course, they're not going to get it right because they're operating in a space that is particularly like unique to a set of circumstances that might never have happened before. And so, but what you also need with like leaders is like, yes, you need them to like know how to like connect with their team. So that's strategic vulnerability and a whole like, you know, ways of building that kind of connection and trust as well is often having like lived through challenging experiences and know that you can get out the other side as well. But also it's like, it's about being compelling. It's about seeming like you are certain about something, because the reality is if they don't show a degree of certainty, no one's going to buy it as well. So it's like you have to start somewhere. You have to try something. And so like these leaders and political figures, like sometimes they seem like their conviction is so strong, and they probably maybe they feel that, but I am sure that sometimes they're like, we just need to try something, like, and this looks like it could work, and then hopefully we're good enough to like fix it up along the way.
So I wonder what the play is here, right? So let me play devil's advocate to that. So we likely see a lot of that conviction in politics because they have to sell the idea and get people comfortable with it. And partly that is a part of being a good leader, is going, hey, we're going to get through this. Here's the plan. But I often think what lacks in politics is maybe two things. The first is when the plan goes wrong, own it,
Yeah.
have some
Yeah.
ownership. Like, we don't always expect you to get it right, but we don't expect you to palm it off on other people when it doesn't. The other thing is, I wonder what play and what rise in popularity we'd see in leaders if they were able to stand in front of the nation and say, we've devised a plan, but there is no certainty here. We've devised a plan and we're going to take it head on and we're going to put this into action. And we hope that the desired outcome comes to fruition. But like anything in life, it's
Mhm.
uncertain. And so we'll own it if we
Mhm.
get it wrong. But if we get it right, God, it's going to be good for our country. I just wonder, and there might be
It's
politicians and people who understand this way more than me who are sitting here going, mate, shut up. This is not your field. But I just wonder what kind
yeah.
of rise in popularity and support from the nation we'd see if politicians were more vulnerable and took greater ownership.
I mean, in my personal opinion, is like a much higher degree. But people are very quick to blame, and I think you know, politics is also like it's political, and there's probably a lot of things at play versus just that particular policy decision.
Mm,
What I'd love to see is like, you know, like remember, you know, even in business, like talk about business, like, okay, we've made this decision. We're going to try this approach based on these reasons. Like, this is the expertise we've got. Like, we feel this is the best process given the time that we've had to pull it together and the information that we have at our disposal. And then I love what you said then. And if we get it wrong, we are going to reiterate, reevaluate, and we're going to go in another direction. And, you know, like, and we take ownership for that not working, but we're
mm,
trying. Yeah, I think startups do that quite a bit. And that's why startups have this like really exciting, like high growth, you know, like people like die by the sword of the people that they're in the startups with because they are brought along for the journey,
mm,
and they get to feel that sense of like success, as well as like reflection when it doesn't go to plan. Yeah, I love that. Like, I mean, if we bring it even to like into daily relationships, you know, like we don't always operate emotionally in our best, right? So like sometimes we get defensive, sometimes we get emotionally volatile, sometimes we say things that we shouldn't say. We're not perfect, and like to expect anyone to be perfect with stress or like it's not going to happen. But what is really great is in a relationship is when the period of time between like maybe like the involatile reaction to the reflected, I didn't show up my best just then. I was affected by stress, but irrespective, like I shouldn't have spoken to you like that, and I'm gonna try and be better.
Mm.
Like it's
So
amazing how
important.
like it's so important. Like the moment you hear that, you're like, yeah, I'm human too, and like I really appreciate that you own that, and like let me try and help not pull at your triggers, and like maybe I can play a role in not like when I see you stressed like that, maybe I can try and help you. It's like it's so funny how you become a team,
Mm.
because it's like versus it become this adversarial situation where it's like you got it wrong and you got it wrong. It's like no, like we're fragile, like human beings are fragile, and it's like if you want to be better, I certainly also want to be better. And I'm going to also want to help you be better. Because you know what? I always said like to people, like, imagine if you wake up in the morning in your relationship and you're like, what's something I can do today to make my partner's life a little bit better? And if they're like, it doesn't work if they're not doing the same. But if you're both doing that, oh my gosh, imagine like it just takes a little bit of the load off you as well, because like it's hard to get everything to do the best that you can do every single day, and to get everything that you would like to get done, and to not drop the ball. Like my goal at the moment is to try and get my son to school on time, and like like time is not like my greatest thing. I mean, I was a couple of minutes late for this podcast, and like it's something that I kind of am challenged with a little bit, because I try and squeeze so much into my day. um and like right now, like when I don't get Harry to school on time, it's like, crap. And I'm really hard on myself. And it's like, I've kind of also like told the community of like mums, and I'm like, I'm trying so hard at this. And like, when I get it right, like I get a phone call going, oh my God, you got on time. And like, and then when I get it wrong, it's like a bit of a laugh as well. It's like,
Mm.
like you own your shtick a little bit.
For sure. I love
You
that. And
like
I
that we
think
just went from like politics to
school drop off,
organizations to relationships to school drop off.
we call that range,
Yeah,
real
right.
range, real
For
range.
everybody's examples.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. There's something that was at the forefront of my mind there that I wanted to ask you that I've become insanely curious about. That's it. It's just hit me. I'm so interested to hear. So I look at you, right? And one of the things of, I guess, within my world at the moment is last year, people on the pod have probably heard me talk about this, but I think it's really relevant for people, especially in the current climate, that last year was a real financial struggle for me and
Mm,
for my partner as well, because she is immediately tied to me and we're creating a life together. But in a world of unknowns, as a speaker, as a podcaster last year, who was attached to the idea of trying to, like, I was attached to this idea that like I wasn't where I was supposed to be, and I was always so far outside myself that you know I should be doing more. I should be more secure financially through this. Why can't I seem to get a grip of it? And I was putting so much pressure and expectation on my shoulders that it was quite crippling for a good 9 months of last year. And
mm,
when I was playing in a few different worlds, that I was essentially in startup phase as a speaker. Even though I've been in podcasts for a while, still startup phase as far as building an audience that is not just consistent and of volume, but rather something that allows me to bring in revenue off the podcast and make it a
yeah.
job, not just a hobby and something I love and passionate about. That this year, the decision to find something that was financially more fruitful so that I could continue to enjoy these as passions and develop off them has been vital for not
Yeah.
only my life balance, but for the enjoyment and the continued enjoyment of these things that I love so much in speaking and podcasting. But I look at someone like you, Sam, even at your level, in a world in which you are doing great things as a speaker, you have her trails, there's all these little pies that you have your fingers in. they're
Mm.
not always certain, are they? So how do you deal with that uncertainty as a professional, but also as
Yep.
a provider? You know, you're a mom and you've got a family.
Yep. I want to just go to you for a second, and I want to remind you of something. Like, we've been speaking for, I mean, I'm not quite sure how long right now, but I have a sense of you and I know about your background. You're a winner. You will get through this. Like, whether you create, you're smart enough and intuitive enough to know that you need to create a baseline of stability to allow you to keep enjoyment and to not be in sprint mode, but to be in like sustain mode. So, like, you are a winner. Like, whatever you do, you're going to make it work. And if it doesn't start to work, you're going to try a couple of times, or you're going to do something different. So it's like, you have to remember that you'll always land on your feet because you have done the hardest thing that you could possibly have gone through. Uh, there'll obviously be more life challenges, but like, you've done so much in like your 28 years with like this kind of we a lot of people these days are living in really different like work environments where they might not have like a base income from an employer. Like, a lot of people are working multiple different avenues to earn their overall income. And I definitely do that. Like, so I went from being a lawyer, and I left in my more junior years because I was scared that if I got to a certain point of financial security, I wouldn't leave because I would feel like that was what the base level was. And so I kind of chose to like reinvent it early before I felt that that's what like that I needed to be at that level. Like, and it was a really great decision for me. Some things I've been intuitive at, and been really comfortable to go with the fly and like not be too obsessive. And I'm definitely not money driven, but I'm also like, I want to be successful in the things that I put my time and energy into. So I have a few little formulas. Like with speaking, I have like a goal of how many talks that I would like to do per month. And I say for 10 months of the year because often there's like 2 months where there's, no work. Now, the reality is like some months I'll have 5, 6, 7 talks, and other months it could be one. But like for me, it was like when I kind of hit definitely those 2 talks per month, I'm like, awesome, like I've done that. And if I haven't reached it, then I have to be a bit more proactive with some of the work that I do. Now, I do understand like when you're just starting as speaking, it is, there's only a handful of speakers that are probably getting full time work, and they are probably also spending a lot of money on their team. And so it's like, if you can be lean where you can, but also spend in the highest yield area, that can help. One of those areas was me acknowledging that one of my deficits was constantly being on email. And as a speaker, if an inquiry comes up, you better answer it pretty quickly because let's say you're getting an inquiry from a bureau, they might need to get that brief out in 30 minutes. And so if you haven't responded and given your availability, and sometimes given like an angle of how your talk can be tailored to that client, because each talk should be to a degree bespoke to the audience and to the brief and the objectives of that client at that conference or at that workshop. And so when you can kind of quickly pull that together, that can help. So, I often travel, and I don't want to be connected to my phone 24/7. So, like, one of my best decisions in 2016 was getting an EA. And I've had two now, and one transferred to another because another one, the first one that I had, and she was amazing, and she then wanted to work into another space. And then I got someone else who was actually leaving the bureau world and then wanted to take on a couple of speakers to look after them. And she is like amazing. She's like my friend. I call her, she's my consultant.
Mm.
Like I'm like, she is 10 times better than me because her skill set is so much better than what I could do in that. And like, like we're such an amazing team. And like, it's so funny. Like I had like I call it, and it becomes personal. Like when you work with people and they are playing a role in helping you develop your business, and you're also helping them develop their business too, because you're kind of like symbiotically connected to each other, both personally and professionally. So that was a really great decision for my speaking career. At the time, I was like, how can I afford this? And the person that I have right now, like her hourly rate is high, but she is bloody good. And she is
Mm.
worth every single cent of it. And what she can achieve in 2 hours, I bet you it would take someone else 10 hours and they wouldn't even do as good a job. So it's like, yes, the hourly rate seems high, but the yield is great. So that was something that helped me with my career. I also feel like you have like sprint period or focuses. So like I have my speaking career, I have her trails, which is like my absolute devoted obsession. It's my baby, and I like the women in the community and where we're trying to grow it. Like, yeah, I should go backwards. During COVID, when every ball was thrown out the window, I lost my entire speaking career and source of income in 3 days. Um, as opposed to kind of getting deflated, I tried a lot of things. And this is kind of something that I do in life. And it does not work for everyone because people would feel an overwhelm too much. But what I like to do is I throw a lot of balls up of things that I think could work. And it's interesting to be able to work out. You can't do them all. Like, there's no way you could possibly do them all. During COVID, I did the podcast, I set up her trails, I had a book club, I had a whole bunch of stuff. And what I needed to see is like, which ball did I want to keep up in the air? And that is based on interest, relevancy, where you feel like you can make the greatest impact. And for me, like, I loved doing the podcast. It was so amazing, but like I couldn't fit it in with her trails. And so like I just dropped that ball. And a lot of people wouldn't do this process because some people hate balls dropping and they feel bad about it. And I'm like, that's the cost of doing business, because for me that helps me know what I'm meant to put my energy into. And it means I don't have like regret, like, oh, should I have done that podcast? Like, everyone seems to be great doing podcasts, and I'm like, no, like, you did do it, um, but like it wasn't the right thing for this particular season if you want to grow her trails. So that's one of my processes that I take to work out where I want to put my investment into. And then I also do a lot of social impact and advocacy work. I work with like, I have long-term relationships with partners, but ironically, they all feed into each other. Like everything I do, it's like this ecosystem. Like, and I used to think the ecosystem was like, adventure, exploration, connection to social impact, and storytelling, and they would kind of be this triangle effect. And it's like kind of like broader now, like from that experience. And it was never my intention to do this. Like, I think a lot of people these days look at what other people are doing and go like, I want to do what you're doing, but I kind of want to skip the exploratory process of getting there. I want to be at the end result. And then they are hard on themselves when they can't get to that end result straight away, not realizing that the people that got there didn't necessarily initially plan to get there. They went on a journey. They went on a quest. And it was that quest that taught them that that's where they wanted to go to next. And like the opportunities that kind of they crafted or were exposed to. Don't skip the journey. And like the reality is you're always on it, because like I don't feel like I'm at this pinnacle of success. Like, I just love what I do, and it's like I also like the grind. I like entrepreneurs like the grind. People who are not that way inclined like would find the grind debilitating. Like, it's never ending. Like, you know I've actually recently like realized that I'm probably a bit work obsessed, and there is a sacrifice and there's a cost that comes at that. I could work every hour possible, like, because I love what I do so much, but it's not healthy. And so, like, there's some people who are like, addicted to alcohol or drugs, and like my addiction is actually no better than anyone else's. Like, there is a cost that comes to it, and I'm really trying to work on that. But that's why I build in a team, because like people hold me responsible as well. So like, I guess long story short is like, don't cut the process. Be willing to like drop some balls to kind of to teach yourself where you want to go into. Build a team, where it doesn't have to be like employees, but like maybe contractors of skill sets, like people, like, you can't do everything. You may get to a point where you can't do your editing. Like, you might be like, you know what, maybe I jump on Fiverr, which is like a freelance platform, and I might need to trial a couple of like podcast editors, but eventually I'll find one that maybe works for me, for the cost and for what they do. And that time that I used to spend in editing, I can put it into something maybe a little bit more high yield for me.
Yeah, that I feel
And
like
that's
that
the
is
great
upon me
stuff.
in the next 6 months. Because if
Yeah.
I want to
And
continue to perform at the level that I am, I have to be able
you've
to
and
let go of the control and also invest in something without any guarantee.
Yeah, and also like obviously you want a perfect podcast, but the reality is like it doesn't need to be as perfect as you think. Like so maybe you will do a little bit of a better job, and of course you will, like you're more invested in it, like you would probably listen to the podcast 3 times and go over every single note, but like
Mm.
an audience member won't even be aware of that. Maybe it's been great right now, but like good editors will work out your style, like, you know. And also I would recommend doing it before you think you can do it, because what happens with that then is you then make sure that you can keep doing it. Like you'll earn money in other areas to make sure that you can do that. And then you become more successful because you're like developing and you're working in what your natural skill set. So these are like some of the things that I've learned over the time, like invest before you feel like you can afford it. And it like sends this signal to your brain to like keep performing
I
versus
have to
like, yeah,
I have to
no,
ask
go
you a
ask
question
questions.
quickly because
Yeah.
it's so funny. One of the things I've observed about myself, and I probably haven't even said this out loud, but it feels very present in
Mm,
how I'm resonating with exactly what you're saying right now, is I was so rebellious and so full of belief in the period of my life between the age of 24 and 27, because at the time I could risk it all and no one else suffered the consequences. There was not a single soul that would suffer the consequence of me fucking it all up by myself, and I could deal with that because I knew that, well, that was the adventure I wanted to go on, and I'm okay with it. And my partner believes in me more than I'll ever believe in myself. She's the most supportive person in the world, but there's a little bit of me that looks at her, and I love her so dearly that there's a little bit of fear that if I invest a little bit too much and we get back to a position in which we were last year where it was really tough, and we thrived through that period. Like our relationship
mm.
grew so strong through it. We're speaking about it this morning, actually. There's a little part of me that just doesn't want to put her through that pain again. Because, like you said, when it comes to the running, you can be out there and fully recognize the fact that you chose this suffering, but she
Yeah.
didn't. And she's chosen to be with me and she understands the life that I want to live. But I don't want to
Yeah, I
inflict
mean,
that on
like,
her.
okay, I think you're giving a little cop out to begin with, but she's with you. She knows you.
Mm,
Like, what's important is like the conversations that you have when you take risk.
mm,
It's like, okay, is this the right thing this is what I think for the business. This might be good right now, but is this good for our relationship? And like, you know, can we maybe trial it for a little bit? And if it's like, what you pay for an editor for 4 podcasts, you commit to someone. Sometimes you'll get a cheaper price if you commit to a couple more than just doing one. You know, do one to work that you've got a good relationship, and then go, cool, this worked really well. Let's commit to doing. Can I get a bulk price to getting the next 5 done with you? Then you do and so like this is what you and your partner. Did you say Sam or Sarah?
so
So
you're
sorry.
on the S. You're on
I
the
was
S.
on the edge. I'm so sorry. Okay, so then you say to Sophie, like, okay, cool. Like, do we think as a partnership that we're comfortable like taking this little risk right now? This is where I think I can put that time into, probably in a place that I can earn some more money
Mm.
anyway, like realistically, or maybe business development or whatever it is. You know, like if you put the time that you put into editing into getting another sponsor for the podcast, like, you know, maybe that's what you're better at. Like you're the people person, you're the visionary. Like sometimes you have to get away from a little bit of the detail to be able to like build your brand further, to build the podcast. And like if it doesn't work, like if all of a sudden you're like, okay, this hasn't yielded results, like, you know, like then you change it. But
Mm.
like, you know, I don't know your relationship, so I don't want to say too much, but like, I don't think from what you said about your relationship and Sophie, like, and her capacity, like, don't sell her short. Like, she's strong, she's with you,
Mm.
and she backs you and believes you, and like, you can work your communication style will be able to like navigate through it.
I don't disagree with you at all. In fact, she said to me the other day, I had a like potentially really good guest come up over email, and she said to me, I think this one would be really influential. You should probably book a flight and get a studio in their state because that one needs to be recorded face to face. And I
Yeah.
was like, oh, but I don't want to like put us out. And I'm like, maybe I got to, like you said before, have enough integrity to go, mate, when you stand on stage, the first thing you talk about is the power of belief and how your parents' belief in changing the narrative of cystic fibrosis and how it would affect your life has had the biggest impact on you. So I'm going to take your little, I'm going to call it massive right hand down the middle there to say, don't
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 sell
put
yourself
that on
short.
others. Don't sell myself short. So I
Yeah,
appreciate
and
that.
also like maybe you work out a budget of like, and you kind of like, I'm often into like, here's the idea, but like, how can you implement it? Like, you sit down and you look at your finances and you go like, okay, what amount could we invest this year into like what we call our take risk budget? And the take risk budget is like, we don't know what the outcome's going to be of this thing. Like, you could you could pay for that flight, you could go to Melbourne, and like the podcast could be a flop. Like, worst case, like, like Tony Robbins always says that, like, what's the worst case scenario? Like, think of it. I also call that a notion of pre-mitigation. Pre-mortem. Like, think of what could be the worst thing that would happen if you took this decision. And typically it's not that bad. Like, it's like, okay, well, maybe I lost $200 on a flight, half a day where I couldn't work, and the podcast wasn't as great. Oh, well, learning lesson. At least I took a risk. Maybe I can implement next time a couple of questions to kind of to test out if this podcast guest is worth it. And what I mean by that is like, every person is great to speak to, but it's often about the rapport that you build. So maybe like before you get on a plane for someone, maybe you could ask them like, hey, can we have a 10-minute chat? Or can I even have like a 5-minute chat with you? Like, I'm really thinking of getting on a plane right now and I just want to, whatever, you can tell in 5 minutes if you're going to bounce. And like, that's
For
what makes a
sure.
good podcast in person. Like, can we bounce together?
Yeah, I love that. That's very sound advice. The last thing I just want to say to compliment you before we leave is I heard a quote the other day by a guy named David J. White. And he said, and I've written this down because I don't want to butcher it. If the path before you is unclear, or sorry, no, I butchered it. Let me go again. If the
I
path
love
before
that.
you is clear, it's probably not your path. And I love that when I look to you, your path has had so many twists and turns. You have
Mhm.
taken pivots, you've leaped through things and it's made you grow and you've been stronger for it and you've thrived because of it and your life is a product of it now. And I can see that there's been challenges along the way that have tested you and knocked you back a step and you've had to charge forward again. But I just love that your path is so unique to you that for me, it is so clear that you're doing exactly what you're meant to be doing. And for me, it's so inspiring to see. I know you're not huge on that buzz, just be inspiring, but to me, you're inspiring. And I'm learning so much from you. And I'm looking forward to over the next couple of years continuing to learn from you, hopefully seeing you speak on stage live one day so that I can be there with my
Coming for a
notebook
run with me.
in the
We need to get
Dandenong
our friend.
Ranges.
Yeah, we need to get our friend Benny Seymour, and we can. Yeah, I messaged him saying that I was chatting to you, and he goes, "Ha ha ha! What a crew!"
He's a great man. So yeah, I'd love to do that. That'd be great. But thank you so much for your time. I'll make sure that within the
um,
show notes of this, everyone can find you on all of your different platforms. And for other gals out there that want to be a part of her trails, I'm going to make sure that all the links to everything are in the podcast show notes. So thank you so much, Sam.
Thanks so much, mate.
Cheers.